Matt Day, Giles Turner, and Natalia Drozdiak, writing for Bloomberg, April 10th, 2019. Amazon workers are listening to what you tell Alexa. A global team reviews audio clips in an effort to help the voice-activated assistant respond to commands. Obviously, the report focused primarily on Amazon. Amazon.com Inc. employs thousands of people around the world to help improve the Alexa digital assistant powering its line of Echo speakers. The team listens to voice recordings captured in Echo owners' homes and offices. The recordings are transcribed, annotated, and then fed back into the software as part of an effort to eliminate gaps in Alexa's understanding of human speech and help it better respond to commands. But the reporters did their jobs, asked the obvious follow-up question, what about other virtual assistants, and answered that as well. Apple Siri also has human helpers who work to gauge whether the digital assistant's interpretation of requests lines up with what people said. The recordings they review lack personally identifiable information and are stored for 6 months tied to a random identifier, according to an Apple security white paper. After that, the data is stripped of its random identification information, but may be stored for longer periods to improve Siri's voice recognition. At Google, some reviewers can access some audio snippets from its assistant to help train and improve the product, but it's not associated with any personally identifiable information, and the audio is distorted, the company says. Lenta van Heer, Ruben van der Heuvel, Tim Verheyen, and Denny Bart, writing for VRT News on July 10. Google employees are eavesdropping, even in your living room, VRT News has discovered. Putting the name of your publication in the title and in almost every graph is tight. Not everyone is aware of the fact that everything you say to your Google smart speaker and your Google Assistant is being recorded and stored, but that it is clearly stated in Google's terms and conditions. And what people are certainly not aware of, simply because Google doesn't mention it in its terms and conditions, is that Google employees can listen to excerpts from those recordings. But they do offer this as well. Most recordings made via Google Home smart speaker are very clear. Recordings made with Google Assistant, the smartphone app, are of telephone quality, but the sound is not distorted in any way. Then, just this weekend, Alex Hearn, writing for The Guardian. Apple contractors regularly hear confidential details on Siri recordings. Although Apple does not explicitly disclose it in its consumer-facing privacy documentation, a small portion of Siri recordings are passed on to contractors working for the company around the world. They are tasked with grading the responses on a variety of factors, including whether the activation of the voice assistant was deliberate or accidental, whether the query was something Siri could be expected to help with, and whether Siri's response was appropriate. Also, Apple differs from those companies in some ways. For one, Amazon and Google allow users to opt out of some uses of their recordings. Apple offers no similar choice short of disabling Siri entirely. Although that part has been disputed, there is an iCloud Analytics toggle in the privacy settings that says it includes Siri Analytics, but none of these things are crystal clear, and that's largely the problem. Here's how Amazon responded to Bloomberg. We take the security and privacy of our customers' personal information seriously. We only annotate an extremely small sample of Alexa voice recordings in order to improve the customer experience. For example, this information helps us train our speech recognition and natural language understanding systems so Alexa can better understand your requests and ensure the service works well for everyone. We have strict technical and operational safeguards and have a zero-tolerance policy for the abuse of our system. Employees do not have direct access to information that can identify the person or account as part of this workflow. All information is treated with high confidentiality, and we use multi-factor authentication to restrict access, service encryption, and audits of our control environment to protect it. And Google to VRT News. This happens by making transcripts of a small number of audio files. This work is of crucial importance to develop technology-sustaining products such as the Google Assistant. Google states that their language experts only judge about 0.2% of all audio fragments. These are not linked to any personal or identifiable information. And Apple to The Guardian. A small portion of Siri requests are analyzed to improve Siri and dictation. User requests are not associated with the user's Apple ID. Siri responses are analyzed in secure facilities, and all reviewers are under the obligation to adhere to Apple's strict confidentiality requirements. The company added that a very small random subset, less than 1% of daily Siri activations, are used for grading, and those used are typically only a few seconds long. Even though Bloomberg reported on it all back in April, and I'm fairly sure it's been talked about on and off for over a decade, the VRT and now the Guardian pieces really caught fire, especially the latter. Maybe because, unlike the others, it front-loaded the part about sex, crime, and business, or maybe just because it came out after Apple started putting big, privacy-centric billboards up in Las Vegas, Toronto, and Hamburg. So while some may say Apple is being held to a higher or different standard here, it's not by anyone other than Apple themselves. At issue is whether Amazon, Google, and Apple properly disclose the process. In other words, explicitly say other humans are part of the process. Whether they effectively allow you to opt out, and not just of the service itself, but specifically the human QA part, if you want to, and whether or not that should be a specific opt-in instead. That's on top of the larger arguments about whether or not security white papers and privacy policies or terms of service agreements are even human discoverable and legible to begin with. And at the opposite extreme, whether the concept of privacy in the digital age is viable or beneficial anymore. And even more broadly, I'd argue more importantly, we're all still only at the beginning of this debate. It's about location and behavioral and voice and video data captured and analyzed right now. But soon enough, the entire world, including all of us, are going to be constantly ingested all the time by a wide range of sensors for AR, VR, and autonomous technologies. It won't be very different from living on the grid or in the Matrix, and if we don't figure out how to handle personal privacy now, it's going to be even more problematic with everything that's coming next. To help me sort through all of this, I have voice first expert Brian Romilly on the line. So hit subscribe and weirding away that bell gizmo so you'll actually know when the next video comes out. I'm Rene Ritchie, and this is Vector. Brian, how are you?
Doing wonderful, Rene. Thank you so much for having me here today.
So what was your reaction when you saw all of these stories and the most recent ones in specific?
Thanks for asking, Rene. You know, I'll get into the complexities of why I'm very annoyed with the way folks are using humans to decode some things that don't require humans to decode. But I was really quite shocked by a number of reasons. First off, just plainly the optics of the situation.
Yeah.
The optics of what stays in Vegas, what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas advertising campaign. This does Apple no favors whatsoever. In general, the problem that we have with what I call the voice first revolution is that we've sort of married into this concept that supervised and unsupervised learning and human tainted learning in artificial intelligence for human utterances are going to be required to sort of
Sure.
jumpstart the system. And that may have been fundamentally true 7 or 8 years ago. It's no longer fundamentally true. And here's the biggest issue. So first off, I want to say that I have no insight on whether the story that The Guardian wrote was entirely factually correct. So we're going to operate on the first order premise that it's correct. All right, we have one of the wealthiest companies on the planet with some of the best technology on the planet, in my view, using third parties. It is absolutely 100% unacceptable to not use Apple employees. And there's a lot of reasons for this. The very first one is nexus. You want to have a nexus over this entire environment from a legal standpoint and from an optics standpoint and from a control standpoint of being able to directly control the givings and takings of Apple employees. These are not Apple employees. They're contractors. And so,
and I'll just add to that quickly that we've seen this with Apple Maps as well.
Yes.
And it is a problem throughout Silicon Valley, but a company like Apple, which champions sort of civil liberties and civil rights and has been so ardent in support for workers, outsources some of these fundamental jobs instead of making them core to Apple.
Rene, this is it precisely. Apple has, rightly so, and very much deservedly, is a champion of privacy and has done probably more than I think any company that has a public facing product like this in protecting privacy. So the dichotomy of using outside contractors for utterances and complete sentences, if not entire audio streams, is on the face of it blatantly wrong. And there is no way to justify this. Apple
can't be reconciled with their public statements.
No, and it can't be reconciled by a company that is so brilliant as Apple. You can hire a manager who can hire people who can listen to audio files, and we'll get to whether or not you even really need to do that.
Which is what they do with App Review, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
So why not do that? So somebody needs to address that internally in Apple and pronto. And Apple.
Well, again, this has been I don't know about widely known, but this has been known in the industry for a decade.
Oh, yeah.
It's come out every once in a while. Bloomberg again published it in April, but nobody really cared.
No.
But I think The Guardian. The combination of contractors and putting sex and crime in the lead really got a lot of people's attention.
That's what shifted, I think, the attention.
And the bottom line for me is once you have contractors, you remove the absolute accountability that is necessary for this kind of environment.
Yeah. Well, you not only do that, you're also removing potentially a legal nexus, right? For what happens if this person decided to go the other way and sell this data? Apparently,
or like with Google, hand it over to the Netherlands media.
Exactly. So the next step is another optic thing, and then we can go into the technical aspect, and that's differential privacy. Now, differential privacy, the concept is really quite valid, and there's a lot of ways to achieve, what is generally conceived as differential privacy, but there's a lot more to it than just a few fundamental algorithms and the adversarial, randomized data, etc. I'm going to go to a couple of premises in the Guardian article, and one was accidental invocation. Okay.
Yes.
And this is fundamentally important because I'm working in a garage lab with a piggy bank as my VC. And I can be nearly 100% certain when I've generated an accidental invocation of my voice first system.
So that just means, for people who aren't sure, that just means when Siri or Alexa or Google activate when you didn't mean them to.
Exactly.
You didn't specifically say the words. They just kind of thought you did and then came alive.
Yeah, if you happen to be talking about Syrian cuisine, hey, let's have Syrian cuisine, you may activate. When we have a false activation of a voice first system, the very next thing you do as a programmer, and I design these things, is you try to create context. And we create context by looking at the surrounding words.
Hey, seriously, you want to watch Brooklyn Nine-Nine again? Didn't we just watch 8 episodes last night?
I love it. Okay, so let's break it down. Fundamental is Brooklyn Nine-Nine.
And now Siri just answered me. There you go. Hey, Siri, stop.
Oh, I love it. So we got Brooklyn Nine-Nine and we got episodes. So now we have two things of context. What is Brooklyn Nine-Nine? That's pretty easy to determine, right? It's some form of entertainment. It's a show because we're now associating with episodes. So we have two things of context to operate on. Now, we have to look for, is there a question? Now, is there a question? Now, Siri thought you were asking a question because you invoked. Right, because you did say, "Hey, Siri." Now, we kind of look around that, and then we let it drop. Now, you're not invoking Siri right now. Minutes are ticking. That doesn't need to go anywhere. That sound file doesn't need. It is definitely should not be in the cloud right now. It should be on your device or whatever activated, HomePod, whatever. So 3 minutes go by. We can now safely assume that we now have an isolated incident. You didn't re-invoke Siri, you didn't talk about Brooklyn Nine-Nine, and you didn't talk about episodes. You might now just ask about the weather or turn a light on. So now we have a false invocation. Nothing needs to be studied. Nothing needs to be studied in that. There's a lot of times when sound combinations will be created. So no, there's some AI scientists going to start going after me. Well, we need to know why it invoked. No, you don't necessarily. But let's, for the sake of argument, say, okay, let's do that. So what do we need to hear? Do we need to hear every aspect of that audio? Or can we start to diffuse it? Can we start creating some differential privacy from that sound clip? And my answer is yes, you can. I don't need to hear the surrounding conversations. So a lot of people are defending this and saying they need to decode accents. So let's just say you had a really thick Greek accent, and not too many people have a Greek accent saying Brooklyn Nine-Nine. So what do we really need to hear? We don't need to hear the entire conversation. We only need to hear the critical words, the operational words, the words of action to decode what was being said. And again, I debate, and I'll move this to later on in this conversation, whether a human being ever needs to hear those words. But let's just assume that a human does. The human does not need to hear the entire sound capsule. You have the differential privacy infrastructure already built in, coded into your systems. This is not a new invention. It is not something that needs a high degree of throughput. A single core processor could have done this. You could have extracted those operational words that needed to be analyzed and only extended those out to the greater world if, in fact, you still believe that you need to hear that audio file. It wasn't done, and there is no excuse for that. And again, you're going to have AI scientists that are going to defend this, and I do it all the time without hearing it. And I don't believe it needs to be done in the cloud. We have more than enough computer power to do 99% of everything we do in voice locally. The only time we need to go to the network is to get random, and updated data. The other stuff isn't really necessary. And just ask the person what they meant. If they asked a question about a particular TV show, have the ability for the person to give them the right answer. And then you've solved the problem. Nobody needs to hear anything. You have a bad accent, whatever that means. You said something with a Greek accent and it couldn't understand you. Ask the right question. And then you get the answer. And then you differentially privacize that into the cloud. And now what do you have? You have supervised learning in a purest sense that is actually 100x more intelligent than a third-party mechanical Turk somewhere. Again, so that's lazy.
The only serious sort of pushback I've heard to this is that the most important part for the analysis tends to be the more unique parts, and differential privacy's weakness tends to be uniqueness.
True.
Differential privacy is great if you have a high population density and people are saying similar things, but if you start getting towards a low density location and people are saying very specific things, then it becomes harder to sort of mask out the uniqueness of the utterance.
Oh, that is correct to a greater degree, but what is the resolution of finite control are we looking at? And you don't have absolute control over who hears that audio file, and there is not
line item veto.
Exactly. So these things are important for Apple to address, and they're part of growing pains. But it's interesting that it took this many years. Like you said, this stuff has been out and about for a while, but I think we're all getting more and more sensitive to this in the environment that we're living in over the last couple of years. And we're starting to notice it more, and certainly there's a lot more newsworthiness of it. So
it's interesting to me, particularly because Apple, by virtue of their stance on privacy, but also Google and Amazon, by virtue of their desire to push the technology forward, that we haven't moved beyond this for all of these companies.
Exactly. And it's going to become much more part of the discussion.
And the thing for me that makes this so critical right now is that as we approach this age of ambient computing, we're pretty much there with voice, but we're only beginning to get there with not just video, but with full environment ingestion. And when these systems start coming more and more online, they're scanning everything with a wide array of sensors continuously for AR, for VR, for autonomous technologies. The data and analytics they're going to be pulling from us are only going to be greater, and the amount of resolution is only going to be higher. And if we don't solve these things now, it's going to be much harder to solve them later.
Yeah, let's look at the Roomba fiasco, right? Internal mapping of your home without your permission, or direct explicit permission, apparently. These are things that are going to create a quagmire for a lot of folks. And again, we have to push for the idea that this has to be forefront. It has to be a button that you explicitly click if you're going to do that, or you explicitly state that this is okay for this to happen. Otherwise,
it sounds ludicrous, but just imagine how much information Jarvis or Friday know about Tony Stark.
Exactly. And we are going to move faster in that direction than most people realize, and it does not require AGI. AGI will never happen, and it's unnecessary. What's necessary is high context. And to give high context, you have to give up a lot of you, more than you have ever given up to any technology in history. That's what we're talking about. And to get to that point, you need to create an environment that is utterly and profoundly secure and private. Yeah. And it can't be done in the cloud. And Apple has this opportunity, it's a golden opportunity. And I sit here and I agonize that they're not taking this opportunity to really embrace what privacy and security means and to lead with it. And this includes their user licenses. So
now, there are some people who push back on this really hard and say the idea of privacy in the modern age, in the data age, is dead, that we should be giving these companies more data because the more data we give them, the better service they can provide. Google has argued this point on stage. I think Facebook would love to, but they don't have the current climate to do it. No. But there are a portion of people, and those people they don't like Apple products. I think that Apple's privacy stance is holding them back and resulting in poorer quality experiences. And they would just love to they would love to shove their data up those pipes as fast as possible.
To me, Renee, it's utter insanity because they're not looking at cause and effect and they're not studying history. We've gone through these cycles in history. I mean, this is not a technology problem. This is just the way life has been. And you don't want to allow any corporation or government to singularly coagulate all of your information, your context, and your medical telemetry, because it's all going to go in one place. And if you have nothing, if you think it's based on crime and nothing to hide, then you're really naive. This has nothing really to do with that. You know, the pre-crime system, whatever. I'm not talking that road. What I'm talking about is that you're setting yourself up for a central repository of data that you have no direct control over. And once it's out there, it cannot be retrieved. You know, the reason that we should be concerned is that there's a point of human integrity and human dignity that's tied up in your privacy. And it is, to a lot of folks that have not studied history and have not seen what a lack of privacy has done to people over the ages, you start recognizing that we're already in that age. I mean,
it's dehumanizing.
Yeah, it's beyond what most people can possibly realize. You cannot put 100% of your context in the cloud without endangering you and everybody around you. And I don't care how much of a saint or an angel you are. The danger is compounding. Even though you don't have anything to hide, there is something about this that is very uniquely human, and you just need to think a little bit about it. So
we don't wear clothes because we're hiding things on our body. We're wearing clothes because we don't want to be walking down the streets naked.
Exactly. We don't draw shades because we're doing something nefarious. So the thing is, when you get these AI scientists and you get the Google apologists and Facebook apologists running around saying, oh no, we need to open it all up, it's utter bullshit. And that's a scientific word right now. You know, you don't need to do that. You can do, I'm an advocate of the pendulum swinging back to local. I believe that everything that was in the cloud in 2019 will be highly local by, I'll give myself some time, 2030.
Google was even talking about it this year, right? They were talking about localizing some of their services.
Yeah, and I'm not saying that this is going to happen. I'm saying it is happening. The only difference is who's getting to control it. If we let this go, it's going to be regulated. But it ain't going to be regulated the way you and I are going to like it. It's going to be regulated by a bunch of people that we see sitting around tables answering questions.
Who don't know anything about technology.
Exactly. And you see where these interviews and television episodes look like on TV. They're going to create regulation to make these things utterly impossible. And the thing is, it didn't have to be that way. So how do you answer it? Listen, I'm just some guy, right? I'm just some guy. All I'm saying is, history informs us how to respond to this stuff, and that's with transparency and openness. Don't throw technical mumbo-jumbo at people. Just say, hey, we made a mistake. this is what we were doing, this is why we were doing it, we don't need to do it anymore, and this is how we're going to handle it in the future. And anybody who wants to fight me on this and be an Apple apologist, look at what you're doing. You know, I'm an Apple fan. I might as well tattoo Apple everywhere. I have been an Apple fan from day one, but the last thing I'm going to do is Apple fan Apple into a dead end so that they're lemmings running into the sea.
Brian, thank you so much. I really appreciate your time and sharing all these insights.
Renee, it's been an absolute pleasure being here. Thank you for giving me this time.
You can find Brian on Twitter at Brian Romilly. Again, this is going to be one of the most important issues of our time. And if you want to do more than just watch it all happen, if you want to have a hand in shaping how it will all happen, check out Brilliant. Brilliant is just the coolest thing. A problem-solving website and app with a hands-on approach with over 50 interactive courses, including on, yes, algorithms and artificial intelligence. In the Computer Science Essentials program, you'll dive into the big ideas in algorithm design in a course designed for anyone learning computer science for the first time, as well as programmers looking to deepen their understanding of algorithms. There's no coding required, and you'll go hands-on with a few specific algorithms and learn how to design ones yourself. Yes, you could take part in shaping our next generation of digital overlords. To support Vector and get unlimited access to Brilliant's courses and daily challenges, head over to brilliant.org/vector and get 20% off their annual premium subscription. Thanks, Brilliant, and thanks to all of you, sincerely, for supporting the show. Apple is putting up billboards, literal billboards, saying how seriously they take our privacy. Yet look at where we are with these Siri stories, both from back in April and just now, this weekend. Facebook and Google say they're making their products much more private, but so far they only seem to mean private from developers, not from themselves. Developers who, coincidentally, compete with them on their own platforms. And ongoing investigations and Facebook's recent $5 billion fine make exactly zero dent in their policies or with their investors. Some find this unacceptable and demand changes and penalties so severe they will compel changes. Others find the very concept of privacy in the data age ludicrous, even constraining. So I've summarized the articles, the accusations, the concerns, the responses, and the dismissals, and we've talked about why it's currently done this way and how it could be done better in the future. But now I want to hear from you. What do you think about all of this, especially privacy, the right or the ridiculousness of it now, today? Hit like if you do, hit subscribe if you haven't already, and then hit up the comments and let me know. Thank you so much for watching, and see you next video.